So we're here.
Yeah.
We've got Pat Vecchio back on. In part, well, it's equal parts. You've got a lot of interesting stuff to say, and it's equal parts a nepotism pick because you're my uncle. So, yeah, there's part of this that's just I want to show my cool family off to my friends and actually get you to meet them in person and, you know, share some of your insight and knowledge that you've always shared with me, maybe with a few more people, because I know that a lot of things you've told me throughout my life have helped me kind of get my shit together. So maybe there's someone out there who will take a little grain of that with them too.
Well, thanks for having me on, and thanks for those kind words, Stephen.
What hope do we have, Pat, to bring back some sense of local press to this region? Because it feels like there's not many people other than a few individuals who are kind of their own little islands that are trying right now. Not that the efforts aren't there. We're all trying, but it doesn't seem like we're cutting through the way the old papers were. So how do you see it kind of going forward?
Well, I think what John Anderson is doing over in Wellsville is the model for what is going to happen. John came from the quote-unquote old school days of ink on newsprint. John and I used to work together, and it's been interesting to see how he has changed his viewpoints on how local journalism should function. And I think what's being done at the Wellsville Sun is something that will eventually happen in a more widespread basis in rural regions like ours. I think the days of newspapers being owned by large companies in economies like this, I think those days are coming to a close. There's just not enough money to be made. And when you're dealing with publicly held companies who have shareholders who are opening up their wallets every quarter and saying, you know, feed me with dividends, there's the economy around here just doesn't lend itself to supporting newspapers that can keep shareholders happy. So I think you're going to see a lot of media outlets like the Sun and like what you guys are doing here springing up. Some of them will be done, the people who run them will be doing it just for altruistic purposes because they realize the importance of local journalism. Other people may want to try to make some money from it. They may be able to. It doesn't seem like anybody's figured that out yet, but the bottom line is that people are hungry for stories. People are hungry for news. And I think if you can put out a publication or run a broadcast outlet or a hybrid, most likely, of an online news presence, maybe a smidgen of print and something like this, I think there is money to be made because people want to hear what's going on in their communities and what's important to them. I think the big problem in terms of why operations like this aren't springing up more rapidly and more apparently is that journalism is hard work. It is a tough, at times brutal profession. If you're a people person, if you like people to like you, if you want to get along with people, it's not the business for you. It is mean. It is hard. If you go in with any sense of softness at all, it will just chew you up and spit you out. And when I left the business in 2001, I did not like the person that I had become. You get hard. You get cynical. You put up defense mechanisms to shield yourself from the frequently awful stuff that you have to deal with. And setting that aside, and setting aside the fact that there's almost no money to be made in it for a beginning reporter, reporting in itself is hard work, and it requires considerable thought and it requires planning. It requires knowing what questions to ask and how to ask them and when to ask them and whom to ask them to. It's not just as simple as going out and with a pen and a notepad or your phone and recording somebody and saying, "Hey, what's happening?" You got to think it through. So it's a demanding profession. It's tough, and all of those factors combined, I think, make it difficult for local media, local news operations to get started. But I remain convinced that they will, because there is a hunger. People have a hunger. They want to know what's happening. There was something I used to tell the reporters in the Times Herald staff when I was over there, that if you will have an audience if you can tell people what's going on, why it's important, and what it means to them. And I think that need will bring some kind of some sort of journalism presence back, but we're watching the pendulum swing in the wrong direction now. It's going to go this far, and then it's going to start swinging back, and you folks are going to be there when it does. And what you're doing here is part of the process of stopping the pendulum from swinging in the wrong direction. You know, you guys are going, wait, we got to go this way. So, very, very long answer to your very short question.
I don't know. I was pretty wordy there.
Yeah, it was a little wordy question.
Sorry.
I'm bad about it too. So no. Well, have you retired from print a while ago, but have you kept up with much like online journalism over the years? Have you seen any other models that you'd think would be worth emulating out here? Because I've seen, I should add some context. I've seen plenty of journalists kind of like that have left larger outlets who have become independent through subscription services, kind of like Substack, particularly over the years, has become really famous, and the media companies really don't like that one. So do you think, because, talking with Josh, for instance, my cousin from last episode, over the years, I've been trying to think like how, if he were to try and do his own independent operation, what route could he take? And I find that subscription model seems to be the only answer so far. Do you agree with that, or have you seen any other models that work? Do you know any other people who've figured it out that you think other people should try and learn from?
I like Substack. There are people I follow on that. I think there are people that all of us follow on Substack. A subscription service, sure. The tough part is marketing it. And the even tougher part is finding somebody who is willing to have a go at it. Long hours, hard work for no pay. Have a go at it long enough to get established enough as a credible media preference or a credible media presence to then be able to go out and say, hey, this is what I do. You've seen my work. Would you be willing to pay me X amount of dollars a week or a month for that? That may happen around here tomorrow. It may happen around here next year. 5 years from now, it may never happen. But getting started is the tough part. Getting it established. So, I could be doing journalism now, but it's hard work, and I don't want to do it for free. I was in the business for 23 years. I just don't know how it's going to work out. I wish I did, because it was funny. You go back in the microfilm of what is now the Salamanca Press, and they used to have reporters in Olean. They used to cover what was going on in this city, and the Times Herald did the same thing in Salamanca. It's hard to believe the Salamanca Press is doing stories on the Olean Common Council. Look how far we've gone the other way. I talked about that pendulum a moment ago swinging in the wrong direction. Well, it's got a lot of momentum going there. But who could predict it? You know, I mean, go back to when traditional newspaper outlets started dealing with the internet as a way to improve to expand their presence. They thought, we'll give the product away for free.
It's brilliant.
Yes. Yeah, that decision doesn't look real good right now. Although there are big companies like New York Times are doing very well with their online subscription rate. But
now you can read like 4 articles before they say, hey, pay us some money and if you want to actually read anything.
Yep, you've been selected to subscribe. But my point is, what seemed like a really good idea at the time turned out to be a really bad idea. So who knows what the next good idea is going to look like? Don't know.
Yeah, okay.
So I have a hard time tracking exactly when it all started to go wrong at the Olean Times Herald.
I mean, it was like the mid 2000s, getting towards the 2010s when it really started shitting the bed, you know.
Yeah.
We talked in the episode that we had done with Pat previously where, you know, for a really long time there was a lot of good journalism, a lot of award-winning writers,
right.
You know, good quality stuff that was written about shit going on here. Small paper, not a whole lot going for it, scrappy, staying in there. I don't remember if it was because somebody else bought it. Maybe Pat knows a little bit more, but I feel like at some point in that kind of somewhere skirting around the 2010s, maybe a little before, maybe a little after, it kind of all of a sudden just...
Was the Olean always owned by was the Olean Times Herald always owned by a publisher, or did the Bradford era end up getting a hold of them later? I'm not very familiar with the history because I figure that probably has something to do with it because Bradford era could probably decide how much staff they have.
Well, the Times Herald was owned by a local family, the Fitzpatricks, for decades. I mean, going back as far as the early 1900s. I started there in 82. And in the mid-1980s, the Fitzpatricks decided to sell the newspaper. The family members were getting older, and they had made some nice money at the newspaper, and they wanted to retire and enjoy the benefits of what they had worked so hard to establish. So in the mid-80s, they sold the newspaper to a company, Thomson, Thomson. And Thomson was notorious at the time as being just a penny-pinching company. We just heard horror stories about them. Thomson came in, and they added a Sunday newspaper. The Times Herald had only published 6 days a week. They added a Sunday newspaper. They added a lifestyles writer, they added a business writer, and they added a staff photographer. So they actually made the paper more, so to speak. But they weren't making enough money as a result of that. So they turned around and sold the paper to, I forget what all the companies were called. But they sold the paper to a man named Conrad Black, who was a Canadian and also a member of the British House of Lords. And he had an associate, David Radler, who was the guy who showed up in Olean to look at the books and everything like that. But when at that time, the paper was still making money, and it was making good money. And by the time Black and Radler eventually sold the paper again, and by the time those people had stripped everything to the bone, They were making pretty good money. They had profit margins in, I want to say, about 33%, which is,
Wow.
You talk to anybody.
Back then, too. Holy
Yeah,
cow.
yeah, 33%. But here's the thing. I was editor at the time, and things were going well. And I said to the publisher, I asked him what our profit margin was, and he says 32.9%. And I said, wow, corporate must be really happy with us. And he said, no, they think it should be up around 39%. And that's where things started to go downhill, because we all know what has happened to the economy over the last couple of decades, and we all know what's happened to the media landscape over the last couple of decades. And those kind of margins, if they're out there, I don't know where they are. So, and here's where the tumble begins. You don't make money by, you can't cut your way to profitability. You can't make a newspaper better by not replacing reporters when they leave. You can't make a newspaper better by insisting that the staff do more special publications that are just intended to be ad grabs. Special sections that have nothing to do with any kind of topics that people are interested in. You can't go on raising ad rates. You can't go on raising subscription prices and expect these things to make up for the loss in revenue. But I have not seen any indications, and I have not seen these over a period of years, if not decades. I have not seen any indications where the owners and managers of the local newspaper are thinking in a direction that's different than that. They're just trying to get by providing the minimal amount of news that's required for people to continue buying the papers. And
It's not working.
It's not working. And here's why it's not. Here's the issue. Here's the point that all of this revolves around. The Times Herald and many other newspapers too, to be fair, are operating like it was 50 years ago. And there weren't things like this happening. And you couldn't pull out your phone and get the latest news. Or there weren't 24-hour news television and radio stations and 24-hour sports TV and radio stations and all the different sources of information online. Here's a classic example. When you are looking for tomorrow's weather forecast, when was the last time you looked at a newspaper for it? Right?
I got an app on my phone that automatically every couple hours it'll update. I hit the little refresh wheel. It's right on my home screen.
Sure.
I
don't even have to interact with it, and it's telling me what the weather is right now.
Sure.
So
Yes.
it's pretty convenient now.
Every day in the newspaper, there's a weather map with a weather forecast. That's just one example. Another example, sports. When was the last time you looked at the agate type, the tiny type section in the sports department, to find out how your players in your fantasy football league performed? If you want to know that stuff,
You've got an app that's got all your players loaded up, and you've seen all their points already while you were watching the game, and you were keeping track on your phone.
But the newspaper will run a full page of that stuff on Mondays after the NFL. People's attention spans are short. When I used to teach news writing at Bonaventure in the early 2000s, and I wish I could remember the statistic, but for a news story, a huge chunk of your readers for any news story typically have bailed after the first 5 paragraphs. Okay? So when you turn to the back page of the front section in the Times Herald, and there is a news story that takes up 2 full columns on the left-hand side of the page, how many people are getting beyond the 6th paragraph? Why do that? Okay? There are some stories you have to say something. You have to assume maybe somebody's picking up the paper and they don't know anything that's happened the day before. But if there's a story about the wildfires in Maui that is 42 column inches long, the person is going to say, oh my God, wildfires in Maui, this is terrible. And they're going to go to, they're going to turn on CNN, or they're going to go to their favorite online website.
They're going to go to Google and search Maui wildfires.
Right. They're going to get the latest information from someplace. So, and that was fine. That was fine in the 70s. But why do the same thing as a print publication? You can't keep up with the news.
It sounds wasteful too, honestly. It sounds like a waste of resources. At this point, it doesn't need to be re-reported.
That's right.
If you're already directing attention in that way, why not use those assets to then continue to highlight what's happening in the community?
Because then you'd actually have to take the time and the effort and pay somebody to go out into the community and write a story that's thoughtful and engaging, and not just rehash some bloated bullshit. Take some AP lines and chop and screw them and call it.
When I worked in Salamanca, the Press was the smallest daily newspaper in New York State. Mm-hmm. We had on the news staff, when I started there, we had the city editor, we had the county editor, and myself. There were 3 of us. When I worked there, I did a series of articles highlighting how part-time police officers in the city of Salamanca, how their training was so insufficient that there could very easily arise a situation where the city could get sued. I was right out of college. Mm-hmm. I was as green as could be. But this series resulted in changes not only in the training the part-time police officers in Salamanca received, but I watched it. It had a ripple effect. Other communities came to the same conclusion. Okay, we uncovered a police shooting one morning.
Wait, when you say uncovered, it wasn't just being publicly reported at the time?
No.
Whoa.
No.
This was the story you were telling a little bit last time.
Yeah.
Wow.
Got a tip from the guy at the local PD, said, hey, you ought to look into this. And we looked and were able to find out what was going on. But the point is, we had a small publication, but we were able to do significant work.
Yeah.
Because we thought about it. So much of what upsets me about the Times Herald, and I need to explain something. I've been reading the Times Herald since I was in 3rd grade, and the paper was a great big broadsheet, and I had to spread it out on my living room floor and get down on my hands and knees so I could read the comic strip Mandrake the Magician. 3rd grade, okay? I delivered the newspaper. I worked there. It's been a presence in my life for ever since I was old enough to read newspapers, and I worked there from 1982 until 2001, and I became the editor of my hometown paper, and it means a lot to me. It really does. And I understand the business is tough, and I understand they need to make money, and I understand all those things, but still. They're going about things the way they always used to. Case in point, the lead story on page 1 last night was a story about a report from the state controller, Thomas DiNapoli, of all the problems facing rural Western New York. Mm-hmm. We are here in a basement in rural Western New York, okay?
Yeah.
I think by now we know what the problems are in this area that we live in. We know, but the story went on saying the report said no jobs. The report said poor access to health care. The report said needs no internet. And the story just went on and on and on. And I was sitting there reading it because I was looking for answers to these problems. I was looking for the controller to tell me, okay, and here's what we're going to do about it. And so the story jumps from page 1 to an inside page, and I'm reading and I'm reading and I'm reading. And all I'm seeing is, since Stephen swore earlier, all I'm seeing is stuff that rates a 10 on the no shitometer.
Yeah.
Okay. And then there were some comments from other people, other organizations, AARP, this, that, and the other. And, okay, a couple of them touched on possible solutions. We need to roll out more broadband in rural communities. Fine. But here's the thing. If you're a journalist, you get in touch with your local representatives and say, did you see the controller's report?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. The controller says there is access to proper health care is difficult in this region, and you say to your state senator or your state assemblyman, what are you going to do about this? When are you going to do it, and how? And if the senator or the assemblyman or the congressperson waffles and says nothing, which politicians will do from time to time, then you say, okay, fine. And then you call them a week later and you say, that conversation we had last week, what are you going to do about this? Okay? It doesn't get done. Those stories aren't getting done. Part of the problem at the Times Herald is there is an over-reliance on press releases, and they print them verbatim, and there's nothing wrong with a newspaper printing press releases. Nothing wrong.
Was that a press release?
Well, they went through it. I forget. The story had a byline on the top of it, but whoever it was went through it and said added the report stated, or the report went on, or the report continued. But yeah, it was all a press release from the controller's office.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I was reading, I don't know if it was the same article, but something similar, and it said that, a lot of the areas didn't actually report any information for all of this shit, so we don't actually know what's going on.
Well, I was looking at census information for the city of Olean a month back for one of the other shows we were doing, just to see, median income, stuff like that, and they barely can report information that is in 2020.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because if none of these cities or small towns are actually reporting any of the data that the state needs to assess these needs, then they're going to come back and say, "Oh, they didn't report," so right, we don't know.
It's as someone who's put out a lot of press releases, I've been a little surprised that I haven't gotten more questions.
No editorialization whatsoever.
They just post it usually whatever you send them. They post straight out.
It's usually what I've put in there, and don't get me wrong, I put effort into what I write.
You're a good writer. We're not saying anything.
I mean, it's just it's not that. It's just I would expect more questions. I'd expect someone to do some follow up and say
a professional to come and look over it and
make sure you're not BSing them.
I mean, I imagine someone looks into it to an extent. I hope
they looked if there was any red lines under it.
Yeah, in Microsoft Word, but it's I put these publications out there, and I put a lot of things in them, and I mean, I sure hope someone's fact checking it. I know I did, but
I hope you put something so incredulous in there someday, and they don't check it
one of these days.
Well, going back to the idea of press releases, last week there was a story in the paper about the new school year getting underway at Southern Tier Catholic School. And it had your typical, things are going smoothly, blah, blah, blah. And then about 4 or 5 paragraphs into it, it says, but there aren't any students at Archbishop Walsh Academy this year.
That's just part of that article?
Yeah, it's like maybe 4 or 5 paragraphs.
Are they all part of the same group? Is that why, or did they just
I mean, the diocese owns
You'd think-
Walsh and our.
You just
all
think that would be its own article.
You would, and you would think that the idea that for the first time in 60-some years there is not a secondary student enrolled in a Catholic high school in Olean, you would think that would be the lead. But it wasn't. And so the press release addressed that in sort of a glancing manner. But the press release said some things that a reporter, a thoughtful journalist, somebody who wasn't rushed to just churn out story after story after story. The press release said something about the number of students who were in grades K through 7 at the Southern Tier Catholic School, and there were about 40. Was the phrase they use. So you've got about 40 students in 7 grade levels. So do the math. That's somewhere between 5 and 6 students per grade level. But nobody did the math before the press release was put in the paper. And more to the point, nobody got back to the person who provided the press release or the people who were in charge of running the Southern Tier Catholic School and saying, you've got 40 kids in grades K through 7 this semester. How is that an economically sustainable model? How many faculty members do you have? What does it cost to attend Southern Tier Catholic School?
How's this running?
How are you providing proper education
Exactly.
for these 40 students?
And believe me, I'm not putting down Catholic education by any means. Many friends of mine in high school went to Walsh.
And you know what? They probably had like the economic backbone to actually provide the students what they needed to, be educated and successful. Whereas today it's like, I mean, it seems like they're barely fucking holding it together.
I don't know what kind of education students are getting at Southern Tier Catholic School. Until I'm told otherwise, I'm going to assume they're getting a good education. But the point
there's
is,
nobody even asking. But there's nobody even asking the question.
well, I don't know how.
It just looks pretty grim from the outside when you contextualize it like that. When you actually read that 7th paragraph and you realize, whoa, what's actually going on?
Well, here's
here?
the thing. If you're a journalist, you want to ask those questions not because you've got it in for Southern Tier Catholic School, but you want to ask those questions so that people who have students in Southern Tier Catholic School now are going to be able to look a year down the road and say, okay, are they still going to be around, or should I be making other arrangements for my children to go to school? The problem with relying on press releases for news is that things like that happen. There is emphasis directed by the writers of the press release towards certain things, and other things they kind of hope, okay, they'll slide them by and nobody will ask. And when nobody's asking, if you don't have a reporter looking at a press release and going, oh, wait a minute, we'll sit on this for a day until I can get these questions answered. But no, you just put the release in. And that is, to me, what's discouraging. There does not appear to be a great deal of thought being put into the decisions that are being made at the paper. For example, there was a photo in last Friday's paper of the concert Thursday night in Lincoln Park, and there was a couple of guys playing guitar. And the information under the photograph said 2 guitarists from, I think the band was called Freedom Hills. 2 guitarists from Freedom Hills play at this concert at Lincoln Park last night. And didn't say who they were. And this stuck with me because my wife looked at one of them and thought that one of the players looked like Terry Bellamy, the very well-known local guitarist and prominent musician, all-around great guy. And one of the guys looked kind of like Terry. And so Sherry says, "Is that Terry?" And I said, "No." But when I first looked at the photo, I thought it was 2. Used to be when we took a picture of somebody and put it in the paper, we would tell readers who those people were. But they don't do that, and it's just, it bothers me because it's not that hard to do. If I take your picture, okay, how much effort does it take for me to walk up to you and say, I'm sorry, I work for the Times Herald, took your picture, can I get your name, please? Right? It's
thoughtless.
It's lazy.
I know it. I can say from firsthand experience, it takes the graphics department 30 seconds to add that, because that's what I did. I set columns. I made sure that everything had its caption right over at the Money Saver, and it does. It just seems like if it was Terry Bellamy, which it probably was, knowing this area.
It wasn't Terry. But that's the thing,
Oh, so
he's got plenty of bands that he's already in. He doesn't need another one.
I wouldn't be surprised if the Times Herald didn't even have anybody there, and that photo was taken by somebody else.
It was a staff photographer. That's why I'm so critical of it.
So they have staff photographers who aren't paired in the
field.
Well,
they don't have shooters per se anymore. They have reporters go out and they take pictures, and it's just the same as it always was. We would take standalone photos.
Oh, so this was just a failure on the reporters.
Yeah, you don't, and it's such an easy thing to do. Here's the thing. If they're not doing easy things like that, it makes me wonder what other stories they're not getting to because they don't have the ambition to do them.
Yeah.
When they are putting fake bylines on press releases where there is no original reporting involved, it makes me wonder, okay, in what other ways are they not being completely upfront with their readers? I don't know if this stuff matters. I really don't.
No, it does. I mean, it's like a lack of integrity.
Like when I think of a story that has had that same treatment, at least in my opinion, I've brought, these guys have heard me say it a million bajillion times, talk about it with everyone who I talk about this type of stuff with. The amount of sewage that Olean dumps into the Allegheny River gets no reporting, and nobody's been fired from what I'm aware of. And if there has been, it's just been a hush hush. That seems like ecological terrorism.
Allegheny is ancient Seneca for shit river, so it's just we're just doing God's work.
I think the Seneca Nation is suing upstream communities over that very issue. Now,
they should be, quite frankly. Sorry to get my personal feelings involved, but
when was the last time you read anything about that?
The last time I heard it reported was when there was a flood, but we have those every year. But last time I remember reading on it was 2021.
The lawsuit itself?
No, nothing about the lawsuit.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't even know there was a lawsuit.
No, the Senecas are suing the upstream communities over that.
Really?
Now, if I'm a reporter, I write the initial story about the lawsuit, and then I used to have this, I don't know what they call them, but it was like a place to file documents with tabs 1 through 31. So if I wrote that story on April 10th, I'd open the folder up to the next month and file it under 10, so that on April 10th I would make a follow-up phone call. But news happens in more than discrete, individualized 24-hour chunks. And something that happens here is probably not going to be resolved until here or here or here. And you keep following up on that. But so many stories are just reported, and then they die, then they go away, and it's a tough environment to work in. A newsroom is a tough environment.
I'm going to throw this up on the big screen.
He was looking up when's the most recent reporting, and this is 2022.
Gosh, we got a lot of ads up here.
Well, Olean Times Herald.
Amen.
Close that one too.
ARP.
So most recent reporting, which doesn't even wait, does it say down below when this was?
This was 2022,
right? But that addendum, does that say when it was reported on? I guess I'm going to assume it was
yeah,
March
I-
7th.
I'm gonna
discharge
presume-
contained 310 cubic fluid units. I don't know if that's actually what that means.
Yeah. Well, most recently, 48,000 gallons over 45 minutes is a lot.
Oh, yeah.
And I appreciate that the quote was the volume was so much.
I mean, as someone who has many aquariums, I cannot stress how bad this is for the wildlife here. And, we're getting in Tangent City. But for a region that, in my lifetime rediscovered that we had a native hellbender population that we already thought we wiped out,
Sure.
you'd think we'd be trying harder.
What is the date on this story?
This is
I'm looking for it.
Probably at the very top.
right up there. So
May
May
5th,
5th,
2022.
So, but there was an addendum on it that says most recent says that there was another discharge, which said it's in March.
Sure.
So that implies that was this year. So that implies this addendum is 2023, even though they don't state it. Why don't they state when the addendum was happening? Because if it was published in May, or is this the most? No, I'm reading it wrong. Never mind.
I don't.
Yeah,
No, never mind.
this was in May and March is
So-
before. So
So as far as we know, there's been no reporting on one happening this year.
Well,
as far as
I
their
think
quick
from the
Google
time-
search,
from
there
the
was
time.
something
Yeah.
fairly recently, but more to the point.
Sure. Sorry. Tangent
No, that's
City.
okay. When was the last reporting you saw on that lawsuit?
The headline on that was
Threatens
they
to sue.
threatened.
Threatening. Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
and that was about it.
Here we are, May 22. So May, June, July, August. We're 16 months down the road.
Haven't.
They
Didn't even know it was an issue.
I'll tell you, I
Wow.
don't think the Senecas would have waited 16 months to give Olean a chance to clean up its act, particularly in light of a recent, if I'm remembering right, there was something like this that went on earlier this year during the summer.
I was fairly sure around April time too. Yeah, April or May.
I don't think the Senecas would have waited 12 months or 16 months to say, okay, clean up your act. We'll be very patient with you. I should know. We should know from reading the paper if the status of that lawsuit, if it has been filed, et cetera, et cetera. And this is a fairly big thing, right? We're talking about pollution in the major waterway in our region.
The E. coli, literal shit.
that
Yeah.
we're trying to sell as a tourist attraction. Yeah, it's
Yeah, I mean, it says something when
Mm-hmm.
they don't advise you to submerge in it most of the year because of a risk of getting an infection. That's outrageous. I used to think bad enough that we have like the leftover metal that they put in there for years. I thought that was bad. But then this,
Look,
I mean, holy cow.
I don't know what else to say other than it's good, clean American living. We've got dominion over, Earth as God intended, and we're doing a hell of a job. I don't know what else to tell you.
Steve's always bringing us back in, reining us
I
back.
just, it just seems so fucking stupid, but it's like, I mean,
It just
if nobody's talking about it, who knows?
right, and that's just one of the stories in this region that you'd think that I would read that if that was being reported.
I don't want fucking shit in my river.
I'm gonna hop in as,
Sure.
as a layman who really doesn't pay that much attention to things because as I've mentioned a million times, as a business owner, I'm so enraptured with everything I'm doing. I barely have time to look at the news, and the news that I look at is heavily pertaining to the stuff that I work with and the stuff that is meaningful to me. So as a general layman, when it comes to news to the area, I know that I hardly ever read any of the Times publications. I know I hardly read any of the local publications. And I'd say that that's largely due to the fact that it just doesn't mean anything to me, because a lot of the pieces that are in there tend to deal with, of course, a lot of issues, but the things that I'd like to read about are more centralized to the local region if I'm reading it in a local newspaper. And I don't get to see a lot of those stories that I would hope to read about. And I mean, especially with the one we just pulled up, when I do pull up those stories like you're talking about, I would love to see more action put into words and say, well, this is a problem. here's how
Here's what we
here's
asked to
here's
follow
potential
up to try and get some answers if we got them or not.
yeah, and then even a little bit further, are there potential fixes? Are people working on it?
Here's who we reached out and asked those questions to, and here's what we heard.
Truly, Bill Alio's quote, or Alio's quote, should not have only been, 3 to 4 words in that whole article?
It was a little
bit more.
longer.
It was like a quote, and then they elaborated on what he said.
It was just so much.
Yeah, it was just so much was the whole quote.
And the unfortunate piece of that quote is coming back to what I'm saying is it said, it amounted to, yes, there's a problem, and it can cause other problems. I'd much rather hear a quote that says, this is what we're going to do about it.
It comes back to what you were bringing up earlier.
And
too.
I think what you've just done, Brian, is hit on the crux of what we've been talking about here. It used to be good enough for news outlets to tell people this is what happened because they didn't know. Now what do? You say, okay, there's this problem, but then the journalism focuses on what's going to be done to address this problem, who's going to do it, when are you going to do it, how much money is it going to cost, and where is the money going to come from? You look ahead. There was a meeting in town last week where everybody was meant to talk about the improvements that city officials would like to see made on South Union Street, south of State Street. And there were a dozen people there. And to its credit, the Times Herald did a story about this meeting in advance, but they did it so far in advance that by the time the meeting rolled around, I think a lot of people didn't remember about it. They didn't mark it down on their calendars. It's one thing to write and say, okay, they're going to have this meeting in 3 weeks, but then a couple of days beforehand, you want to say to people, oh, this meeting is coming up again. You want to look down the road and tell them what's going to happen. And as a reporter, you want to hold people accountable if it is their job to fix problems. Okay, this situation involving the Senecas, there is no doubt there are no doubt federal jurisdictional issues. There are certainly no doubt Seneca Nation jurisdictional issues. The state is involved in sewage treatment plant discharges into the river. Officials on all levels of government. And so you are, as a reporter, you are obliged to say to all these people, what are you going to do about it and when are you going to do it? Now, the Senecas have got a different stake in this, and so you're going to do the reporting that is Seneca-centric with maybe a different approach because they are the aggrieved party here. But in terms of the Senecas aren't going to come down the river with a barge full of $20 million and saying, here, fix your problem. Okay? We got to fix that. The people we elect have got to fix that. And it's the journalist's job to say, hey, when are you going to fix this?
Yeah.
When are... I just don't want to get started on political rhetoric because... there are a couple of local officials I have in mind who are really, really good at incendiary rhetoric that is designed to deflect attention away from real issues.
Okay, well then I'll do it then. Because you've been in this whole mess much longer. I was pretty stunned though. I had a good 6-month-long internship at the Allegheny County legislature for my senior year of high school. My professor at the time for that course was it was like half course, half shadowing and watching what the building was doing and interviewing staff for the county. We had John Padlow as our person. He was Cat County representative for a while. Anyway, I digress. We in our county, we've been gridlocked in just right-wing control for decades, right? I mean, Allegheny, I don't even know if there has ever been a time when Allegheny County has ever been blue. And if it has, it was probably during the labor movement, in the 1890s, maybe for a minute. We've got what I've seen is you've got cases of really egregious like politicization happening in these positions because they've seen it as an easy ticket to get in. We just had the most recent election we had for our county was about 2 years ago, I think. We had some for our town officials this last year, but we had this one individual who got in, who pushed out, I think, the only independent left on the entire county. Now it's all Republicans. And he basically just got in on telling people that he's a Trump supporter and he's going to get in there and he's going to cut your taxes. And that was it. He made a couple of Facebook posts, bought a bunch of signs, and called it good. When you look on the internet for who this person is, mind you, it's been a couple of years, so I'm sure there's been a little bit more done. But there was one article, like we were 1 week out from election time, and the Wellsville Sun had one piece on the entire field, and this individual was one of 5 candidates. Mm-hmm. Each candidate had a sentence. And I was horrified because I'm like, how can a population properly consent to anything when they're not even being given all the information they need about who these people are? I still don't know where this person's from. I know he's a carpetbagger. I know he's not from the region. He moved here from out of state and, set up shop here, got wealthy, and then decided to run for office. And that's about it, So that rhetoric is being used. I see it here in this county every year.
It even speaks back to, it was like it was like right when the pandemic was starting, and the only Democrat in Cattaraugus County essentially got everything he tried to talk about in session. He got shut down by all the other Republican members because they just didn't want to fucking give him a chance to talk. And it's kind of like, well, if we're not going to listen to every single side and try and make the best decision, then we're not really having a conversation. We're just shutting people down because we don't want to listen to them. It's that same kind of mindset of, well, my might makes right. I'm in power, so I don't have to listen to anything that you say.
Well,
I think
the thing that makes us even more stuck is the fact that nobody's even reporting on it.
Again, if you don't know that that's what's happening, you just assume that everything's fine and that's the way it is.
Well, you've also got, and maybe I'm being too harsh on local press here, but I've noticed because we used to be forced to go to those biweekly county legislative meetings to see what they were all about, and we had one time where they were voting to reappropriate money. This is 2016. They reappropriated funds from child services to basically emboss the building with "In God We Trust." And one of the people abstained from voting, saying, we're going to get sued for this. And it basically passed unanimously besides that one person who just abstained. And there were 2 reporters in the room, and there's never been a single story about it. And I'm like, that's
so much for getting sued.
So much, but that's like in certain regions, that would be a pretty big violation of separation of church and state clauses, and nobody even would bring that up here. This is a government funding, this thing. I know it's, on our money and whatnot, we've done it, but it's a pretty big step to take funds, especially from something that in this area, child services needs all the money they can get to then use it for that. And again, no reporting.
Well, again, that implies a couple things. One, that we care about kids in this area. 2, that we would rather spend our tax dollars on our kids who are struggling versus, making our government building look cooler and the way we want it to.
I would contend that the people, if they were able to read an article saying this, did you know that your money is being used like this, that these people who claim to represent you are working like this?
People might not like that. They
might not be so happy, but that's why I brought up the question. If
ignorance is bliss, baby.
Can they even properly consent if they don't even know what's going on anymore?
Well, this speaks, I think, to the fact that that journalism is tough work, and you've got to learn to think like a journalist. somebody with years of experience in the field would recognize this as being something, there's a story here. They're spending money that was allocated toward in this budget area, and they're reallocating it toward this. And we are, let's see, how do I want to say this? There are people who would say, yes, indeed, in God we trust belongs over the entranceways of all our public buildings. And there are other people who are saying, no, that maybe is crossing the line between church and state. That's not a good line to cross, and let's keep the money where it was originally allocated. There's going to be some conflict there. There's going to be discussion. There's going to be dissent. And in seeing as how it involves public money, it ought to be discussed. It ought to be reported. But if you are an inexperienced reporter and you're there just to record what's going on in the meeting, it's easy to get that sort of tunnel vision and not look outside the minutes of the meeting. Much of the public affairs reporting we see these days, and it's everywhere. Newspapers everywhere are under siege. Much of the public affairs reporting we see these days is stenography. It's not journalism. The Common Council did this, they did this, they did this, they did this. And there I covered the Common Council. Well, no, you didn't, because this happened. What's going to be the effects of this action down the road? Or they identified this problem, how is it going to be addressed? Or there's this budget shortfall, what's going to be done about it? It's
as a layman, I'll jump in again there, because that's one of the areas that I pay attention to, and it's really difficult. Thank you. It's really difficult when they post other meetings on YouTube, and they're horrible 4-hour long videos with no indication of what's happening, with the first 30 to 40 minutes either being muted or not even having anyone in the shot because it's not edited in any way, which I guess is a good thing since it's a public meeting. But it's so painful to try to watch through. And some people on the council were doing like these tiny blurbs on Facebook or something, posting about what they were talking about. But other than that, just finding the information that they were talking about was nigh impossible. Mm-hmm. And then you obviously you have access to it through the video, but parsing that information is not worth my time. It's like, obviously there are topics that are valuable to me and would be worth my time. But if I don't know, how am I gonna find out? I'm not gonna spend 4 hours just to rewatch.
I was gonna say, you set 4 hours aside and you watch the whole meeting riveted.
But you can't, because their audio and visual tech is so poor that you can't even hear what they're saying.
That's usually in the beginning, because like I've noticed that they'll like mute themselves until the meeting starts on some of the videos. I haven't watched any in like the past year, but it's a little discouraging, because I might want to hear what you have to say when you're candidly talking.
Yeah, for a village government, there's no excuse for this.
Yeah,
right?
I think I'd like to hear some of that. But
yeah,
well, Brian, you haven't spoken much during this session, but the things you've said have been really spot on. You shouldn't have to sit through a 4-hour meeting. You should rely on the reporter to sit through that meeting for you and say, hey, here's what you need to worry about. Here's what happened, and here's how it affects you and why it matters and what's going to be done about it. And you talk about that, and you also mentioned the idea of how the journalists need to look forward. They need to say, okay, here's what's going to happen and here's when it's going to happen, as opposed to the meeting began with the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silent prayer or whatever. It's blah, blah, blah. It's
because that stuff that's not important.
What?
The standing for the pledge and saying a prayer. It's cool, routine. Good for you.
Okay, but they approved the minutes from the last meeting. So what?
No shit. Yeah. They were going to do that anyways.
Yeah.
What did they actually talk about? What did they decide to do? How did they vote?
It's so frustrating, because we are not. Look, the people who own local media are only going to devote a certain amount of resources to news gathering and information. That's a given. They've got their profit expectations. They've got to keep a line on expenses. It's all business, and I got no problems with that. But if you are still in the game, if you're still a journalist, you need you can't do things the way you did them 50 years ago. You need to anticipate. You need to understand, okay, my readers already know this. What do they need to know next? You're looking down the road. You're not doing stenography. And this is not that big a deal. We're not talking, you don't have to bring in all kinds of people to do more journalism. You just need to make sure that the people who are doing journalism now are thinking about it right. You need to pay attention. You need to follow up on things. This is not revolutionary stuff. It does not require a whole generation of new journalists to be schooled properly and get degrees for 4 and 6 years. You just go ahead and do it now. It's not unattainable. And I think that is my big frustration with journalism in general and local journalism, and even on a national level. No, I'm not going to go there.
No, let's go.
Well,
No,
I mean,
it's an entirely just.
so I mean, I'll use
tangent.
this as a good point though, because I do need to get headed out here. I'm actually going to a focus group on how we can improve life for business owners and businesses in Southern Tier Cattaraugus County. And boy, howdy, I wish I knew more about that before going into it. Like, I'd love to know more about what we were doing instead of being immediately into the focus group. But I imagine I'm going to learn a lot at the meeting. But like, I'd like to know a bit more, and I'd love to, when I go on yard sales or such, I'd love to hear people talking about how much is actually happening in this community, as opposed to talking about how everything's dying. Because it's most commonly on yard sales too, is I'll hear people talking about how it's dying. And I'm like, are you kidding me? We have an accelerator program for businesses and a co-op space. Like, not to mention a co-op space for getting your vegetables. Like, how these are incredible things that exist in our backyard, and we can just go and do it. Like,
Yeah,
a
well,
co-working
no one knows
space.
about
Like,
it.
I mean, not any town outside of Rochester or Buffalo in our area, in Jamestown, they're not going to have a co-working space. That's pretty modern, and like, we have all these incredible things, and it's just not circulating enough. It's not getting out there enough. And unfortunately, I do need to go, so I can't follow up too much on it. But I'd love to see more of that, more of those discussions, more of getting it out there.
Next time you guys do this, just interview Brian and ask him his point of view on the information he needs and why he needs that information and when and how. And I'm not joking.
No?
I mean,
Well, as a layman, that's an important data point. And just grabbing a couple folks who either got the paper or like your grandparents who had gotten the paper but no longer get the grandparents. Was that your story?
was mine, yeah.
I'm sorry, wrong person. who have gotten the paper, and why don't you read anymore? It'd be nice to talk to them, get that data point, say, how can we make this better for you? Like, what does this work for?
I'm not even sure if the Times Herald asks people why.
I
do need to go though, so I'm gonna head out. Thank you very much for coming
thank
by.
you, Brian. Yeah.
We'll see you later, Brian. Thanks for being here. Keep pressing forward for now. Yeah.
So keep going for a bit here.
Yeah.
What were you were going to say something there?
No, Pat was starting to talk.
Oh, you were going to say something?
Before the pandemic, a couple of years before the pandemic, you could open up the Sunday paper and see page after page after page of ads from automobile dealers. You don't see those anymore. You don't see those ads anymore. And so I was talking with somebody who, believe me, was in a position to talk about this stuff with authority. I said, all those ads have gone away. And this person said, yeah, but there were supply chain problems during the pandemics, and the auto dealers don't have the number of cars to sell anymore that they used to, but that will change, and they will have cars again, and those ads will come back.
I mean,
Excuse me.
shit in one hand and
Yeah.
wish in the other and see which fills up
Those
faster.
ads will come back. If they're
Well, they'll come back, but they'll be on the internet They won't be in the Times Herald.
That's
They'll
right.
be
Right.
in any number of other places, but
People-
not in the Times Herald.
They don't look at the paper to shop for ads. There used to be, way back in the day, page after page after page of real estate ads.
Yeah.
They're gone.
Yeah.
Nobody looks for a house.
I see ads from Petruzzi's agency, or is it Peasant? Yeah, I think it's Petruzzi.
Howard Hanna.
Yeah, that on YouTube sometimes.
Yeah.
Like some of his videos.
Yeah, no, he's got a much stronger online presence than anything else, and that's probably because, I graduated with Paul. He's my age,
Yeah.
so he probably has an understanding of, this is the way to reach people in a meaningful way to get them interested in what I'm trying to sell to them, as opposed to, well, let me run a bunch of ads in the Times Herald that aren't gonna get me anywhere.
The status quo isn't good enough for newspapers anymore, particularly small local papers, and those ads are not going to come back. They're not going to come walking back in the door. But if I am telling you stories, if I'm a newspaper and I'm telling you stories that are important to you and that mean something, you might get some of those ads back because people are talking about what they're seeing in the paper.
Yeah.
And it ain't going to happen the way things are going. And man,
When you were at the Times, did you know what the percentage of like income versus like on subscription versus ad revenue, like how that chart would bear out? Because you'd think, well, the solution here would be write such good stories that we get more subscribers.
Then
As
the
we
ads
lose.
fill in the rest when they start coming back. 'cause
Well,
we got-
I'm talking as we lose ads, because from my perspective, the solution really does seem to be, there are more stories to tell. We have more paper. We have more space now that's not being used by these ads. Mind you, the ads were buying the paper before. But the solution to me seemed to be fill that empty space with better material so more people would be more inclined to sign up. So that way, you're publishing better stories. You're getting more reporting in people's hands instead of commercials. We get enough of that with TV as is. People don't, like we've all been saying so far, you don't go to your newspaper to shop for cars. The only ad people really go into the paper for these days is like the classifieds for like a job, and that's the really, really desperate
well, and
people.
even then,
Even then, yeah, So it's like could you speak on that? Did you know? Is the paper almost entirely surviving on ad revenue at this point?
I don't know.
How about back in the early 2000s? Did you
I was always a news guy and was concerned with what was going on in the newsroom, so I really
That's
tried
fair.
to stay away from the business part of it.
That's very fair.
I do know that classified advertising is the life's blood of a newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I look at the Times Herald every day, I look at how much of the classified ad section is filled with actual ads as opposed to things like puzzles and cartoons and and promotional ads for the newspaper. And I look at the number of local display ads, ads from local and area and regional merchants. And that kind of gives me an idea of how they might be doing. I don't know how circulation mixes into the overall revenue pie. I don't know any of that anymore. I know what their circulation numbers are, but absent any context, it doesn't make any point to talk about those. But in this country, 2 newspapers close every week.
Mm-hmm.
And there are many larger areas than Olean that don't have any print publications at all. And there are major metropolitan areas that get maybe 2 print editions a week. And so the fact that we get 5 print editions a week plus an online paper too, as Brian was saying earlier, there's a lot of good things going on in this
Sure.
community, and that's one of them. That is one of them. I've been sitting here ragging on the paper for the better part of an hour, and I think my criticisms have been justified. But it's important to note that man, we're still not a news desert. So what do you do to ensure that doesn't happen? Mm-hmm. And you take the steps of some of the things that we've talked about today, and you do those. And I don't know what it's going to take. I've talked to people at the top levels of the Times Herald company and talked about many of the things I've talked about here, and haven't seen any changes as a result. Change is hard. Change takes time. Maybe it's still coming, but when I was in the business, when I was the editor, and we were talking about making changes to the paper, my mantra, if you will, was evolution, not revolution. But for newspapers today, in 2023, the mantra should be change or die.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Well,
I've always held that in Olean, we are 20 years at least behind the rest of the waking world. And I don't think that's any different with what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And, again, I think that's a really good point you made about, we do have hope. We do have a chance. We have a solid infrastructure that we can build upon, but it's about making sure that we build something that is worth it and is going to last and is going to have, a sense of integrity and is able to deliver on what it actually needs to, and not just be a bunch of empty noise filling the space because we want to make money. Because it's not going to make money.
Well, one last point on operations, during the death knell of the money saver, one of the observations I made was you'd think a publication that's worth its salt, that's putting out, anything that can be considered a solid subscriber base, you'd think that the onus wouldn't necessarily be on the company to go out and basically need to sell ads, as opposed to people want to be in the paper. They want their ad in the paper. So at the Money Saver, bless our manager at the time, because she was managing the office, she was helping with graphics, and she was our only salesperson. At all three of those, and that was her Monday through Friday to get a paper out every week. And mind you, her staff was me, one other office manager type who just basically helped finish the paper, and then a secretary. That was it. That was the whole paper. And while I'm there, I'm looking through the paper, everything we published, and her job essentially was go out, make sure that every block is filled with an ad every week. That's it. Your job isn't to put out a paper with stories, and at the Times Herald, it feels like I'm watching it slowly morph into that.
It's not slowly morphing into it. It's already there. I just had a friend who had recently been working at the Times Herald, and he recently left that position, and I know that he spoke to me about his frustration going out and trying to sell ads to people who don't have the money, don't see the value, recognize that there is little value in it.
That's why I was bringing up the quality of their content they're putting out and bringing in subscribers that way. Because if your paper is doing well in terms of what you're making, naturally advertisers will want to be a part of it, because your audience should come thereafter too. So it just feels like at some point the objective flipped. It used to be craft something so good that everyone needs it in their house, in order to get it into people's houses, we have to sell as many ads as possible. The strategy just seems completely reversed. And I don't know if it's because publication has just decided that we won't fund you if you can't reach these numbers, and this is the only way they can do it in terms of finances, or what. But
I think it's a little bit of that. I think it's a little bit of, when the internet age really started kicking off, there was a failure to adapt in a meaningful and productive way. again, there's that mindset that, you know, what worked 20, 30 years ago is still going to work today because those car ads will come back when they have more cars to sell, which is objectively, you know, logically nonsensical. But, you know, if you're thinking 20, 30 years ago, it makes perfect sense because that worked back then. Surely not that much has changed where it won't continue to work. It's old reliable. And, well, old reliables, how long can you beat a dead horse till you realize that it's fucking dead?
One of the things I was thinking about on my ride over here was how much local news I get from Facebook.
Yeah.
You know, there is a friend of mine. I've known him. We grew up in the same neighborhood. I've known him for as long as I can remember. And I very often see local stories first on his Facebook feed. And the paper will get to him 2-3 days later, sometimes not at all. So, you know, when you can find out things that you need to know about from your friends on Facebook, the paper is further rendered less relevant, and I'm just an old retired newspaper guy, and I hate to wax nostalgic, but man, I just hate to see what's happening to the industry now, and the fact that there is a local print paper in Olean leads me to think that this marketplace can support a good newspaper. They've just got to go about doing things differently, because the forces that are working against them are not going to change. They're only going to get stronger. So they have to react accordingly. You have to adjust your techniques. You guys are both too young to remember this, but when George Foreman was the heavyweight champion of the world, George was the biggest and baddest man on the planet. I mean, he just destroyed fighters. And then he was going to fight Muhammad Ali, and Muhammad was toward the end of his career, and he was clearly a fighter in decline. And Muhammad Ali was one of my idols for many reasons, and I was afraid George Foreman was going to kill him, literally kill Muhammad Ali dead. George Foreman was that fearsome a figure. Muhammad was, his best days were behind him. So what happens? Does Muhammad go in and try to box Foreman like he would have boxed him when he was 10 years younger? No. He went in and he got up against the ropes and he covered up and he let Foreman punch himself out over the course of, I don't know how many rounds it was, maybe 6 rounds, maybe 7 rounds. And then Foreman got real tired and Ali came off the ropes and he put him away. He put him away, and nobody saw that coming. Nobody knew Ali was going to fight like that. He had never fought like that before. He needed new tactics, okay? He called it the rope-a-dope, was his name for it, the rope-a-dope. And everybody's saying afterwards what a genius he was, And I was thinking, I thought George Foreman was going to kill him. I can't believe he beat George Foreman. But how did he do it? He did something completely different, something that was unexpected. He changed his game plans. And newspapers these days, they're like Muhammad Ali. And if they're going to stand there and try to go toe-to-toe with the forces that are pushing against them, they're going to get knocked down. They're going to get knocked out. End of match. They got to change. They got to change what they do. They got to completely rethink it, because if they don't, the ref's standing over, go 7, 8, 9, 10, the bell rings, fight over. Newspapers lose. They gotta go to the rope-a-dope. That's my epistle for today.
That's